The Horse Race Politics podcast accompanies our forecasting website, horseracepolitics.co.uk. That's horseracepolitics.co.uk. No spaces, all one word, all lowercase. I would say go to the website now to join the race, but it's the day after the election, and we are truly into the thick of it at this point in time. But at whatever phase of the election that we're at, the podcast is brought to you by the good old people at Focus Games and the Wales Institute of Social and Economic Research and Data, or WIZARD, as well as Swansea University. So I'm joined by Matt, and then there were two.
Yeah.
And then there were two. It was...
What's just happened, like?
I mean, I'm stunned. Truly am. Not only has Donald Trump won the presidency, but he's won the popular vote.
Mm-hmm.
I think last I saw it was about 5 million votes. But that was a few hours ago. It's a moving picture. We still, at the time...
Republicans have the Senate, basically, in the bag.
They have the Senate. They've gained House seats. We don't have a resolution on the House yet. There are still a couple of states, I think, that are still counting. I want to say Arizona is still going. And Michigan, perhaps. But these are both looking red.
So Donald Trump won.
Yeah.
I think is the summary, and I think it befits. I feel like I should have my what you call it, that kind of moment, like Tiger Woods, moment like, this is not the man that I wanted to be. This is the man that I am. Like I must confess that if I'm not last in the forecasting tournament at the moment, it's only because I'm beating you.
Because I'm last.
And at this point, it's probably right to praise one of our players, Orange Jesus.
Yeah.
Who turns out knows more about elections and politics than I do. Because Orange Jesus has been very confident about Donald Trump's electoral success.
I would also throw out credit outside of the player base to Bryn in the department as a... he's kind of been the realist amongst us. I think for the longest time he has kind of thrown out points about kind of racial and gender-based tension in the US that would not help for her. I think fundamentally the point of our conversation today is not to really try and give the best post-mortem that we can, because my personal opinion is that it's too soon. And I think you raised a point when we had a quick chat about this earlier. There's a lot of things that we could rip into her for doing that we would also be praising her for had she won.
Yeah.
So I think a good example of that is the whole the point about underplaying the being a woman candidate. I think that's the type of thing that, in hindsight, people are going to be very quick to be like, you needed to push that more. You needed to push the champion of abortion more. It was already a very strong message. But then you go, if she wins, we're kind of saying, well, she learned from the Hillary campaign that you don't overplay the woman card. So I think going too deep into the nitty gritty of she should have done this, she should have done that is not helpful right now.
No, and I think a lot. Well, I'd say two things. It's not important right now in a lot of ways,
Correct.
right? So by far the most important thing is the outcome. And I think the kind of data that you'll need to really unpack that campaign is something that's going to be more accreted more slowly. But just not to immediately just run against and just do a postmortem. But I would say just a couple of things which I think are obvious enough. Like, this was a competent campaign that she ran, in the sense of it wasn't a kind of a disaster-filled campaign.
Yeah.
She didn't ignore or kind of miscalculate where she needed to pick up votes, either in terms of geography or demographics. So certainly Clinton was accused of kind of ignoring the Rust Belt, for example. Yeah. So there weren't those kind of obvious gaffes or dramatic miscalculations. And I think so it seems likely that there might be something other than the campaign at play here that has to be factored in. And so the other, but just to say that I nonetheless think that, so believe it or not, Louis and I were like texting each other about the Alan Lichtman live stream quite early this morning, how sad it was. So Alan Lichtman is no longer 100% on his forecasting, and the last the last like 15 minutes of the live stream are basically just increasingly long silences between him and his son as they realize that there's no way the 13 keys
Yeah.
are gonna
There,
work.
there was a period of intense coping where kind of I think Pennsylvania was kind of shifting to the mail-in ballots, and Trump had this gap of about 220,000 votes.
And they thought it could close it.
And it started closing. At one point, I think it got down to about 150,000, and then about, I don't know, 20 minutes later, it's just complete silence.
Yeah.
And you've got like, Dad, the gap's opened up. Yeah. And like, just for context, for anyone, maybe missed previous discussions, Alan Lichtman is the champion of this kind of fundamentals approach where you kind of take longer term characteristics of the election, things that are less likely to fluctuate dramatically over time, whereas polls can obviously fluctuate quite a lot. And he rooted all of that in his prediction that Harris was going to win. Well, he rooted that prediction of Harris going to win
in the fundamentals.
In the fundamentals. And he was wrong. And that is profound because this is a guy who had called every election. 2000 was the only one of contention, but he did call the popular vote correctly. But he's called like the last 10 elections. And I think that kind of speaks to your point there.
But I think it's also like
else.
So like Alan Lichtman is kind of a very, what's the word? Like he's a very unique part of the kind of character list of the American presidential elections generally.
Yes.
But fundamental based forecasting is quite a well established principle in political science, and I think that is where when the kind of trying to figure out what happened in the campaigns recurs, I think you do have to look at a campaign where the incumbent held like a very favorable kind of deck of cards, especially in terms of the domestic economy.
Yes.
That normally should result in victory. And that far from resulting in a victory, it's resulted in a very clear defeat, where the opponent has picked up, I think, that middle segment of like so obviously Trump maintained his base, but also kind of ate into key aspects of the of the Biden coalition, especially regarding ethnic minority voters. And so the fact that the fundamentals didn't deliver is in itself, I think, insightful. And I think I'd only be right to say that what has delivered as a forecasting tool is the markets. So like as we were watching it, the results pour in last night, even in the early going, where at least to my eye it looked like pretty nip and tuck.
We hadn't had any swing states. Maybe Georgia was kind of the only one that was really showing any signs of, and that was going towards Trump, but not in a particularly huge margin at the time that you're
in the
talking
extremely
about.
early going up the counting. I think Miami-Dade County in Florida was sort of retrospectively seen as showing some of these tendencies.
Yeah.
And maybe at the time, but I don't know. I was just amazed at the way that the markets were interpreting like so powerfully. So Harris was moving from, as they kind of closed the polls, something like just under, like in decimal odds, just under 3, to up to like past 7 by like 3 a.m. And even at that point, there weren't the kind of definitive.
No.
Like at that point, Alan Lichtman was still feeling okay about things.
Yeah.
So the markets, the betting markets, were on this. They were on it in spite of the polling information. They were on it
significantly earlier than any commentary was even.
Contrary, I would say, to what the fundamentals-based analysis would have told us.
Yeah.
And turns out the markets were right.
The markets are very good.
Yeah.
It turns out when people have the money on the line, they are very quick to react. But I mean,
I guess we talked in a previous episode about, well, either the markets know something we don't know, or they're biased. And it turns out that those two things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive.
Correct.
But they certainly appear to have known something, because it wasn't just that they were set out; they were reacting.
Yeah.
And they were sort of, it was quite interesting. I think they processed the count quicker than I did. And I think it was a bad day for people who sort of try and use the fundamentals to kind of divine what's going to happen. Now, and whether that's Trump just breaking politics, which is
it's possible,
or whether that's a kind of failure by the Democrats to kind of communicate their incumbency status relative to the economy.
Yeah.
I think the sideline. I mean, again, like Biden presented problems from a kind of media appearance standpoint because he literally looked like a corpse, like in front of the camera. But like so there was never a kind of moment where Harris kind of claimed his legacy.
No.
And I think the legacy that he can actually stand over as a president is mostly in domestic economic policy.
Yep.
So I think that'll be something to reflect on. Like, how does an incumbent with a strongly growing economy lose?
Yeah.
An American presidential election. Well, we've just seen it happen.
Yeah, and I think fundamentally, like, no pun intended, it is. There was obviously this kind of like bifurcation of the Harris strategy, which is we need to push her prominence because maybe not enough people know who she is, that she was vice president, or who this individual is, and we have to tie her to the successes of the Biden administration. But it seemed to be, from my own kind of take, is that they definitely prioritized pushing her as this new movement, this new candidate, because they didn't want to have any kind of association with the downfall of Biden's
brand,
Biden's brand. But as you say, we've got things like the CHIP Act, we've got the CHIPS Act, we've got the Inflation Reduction Act. Like Biden had significant.
You got 3% plus inflation adjusted GDP growth.
Exactly. The fundamentals, the most fundamentally important things about. I mean, like, to be honest, I don't really think the average voter gives a shit about the CHIPS Act or the Inflation Reduction Act. But economically, there was no, and again, we're kind of speaking from outside of the US, so maybe people can correct us. There was no intensive messaging on the economy in the way that left this kind of vacuum for Trump to just occupy. And it doesn't necessarily matter if Trump is speaking truths. It doesn't necessarily matter if Trump has the right solutions. He is consistently talking about this administration has destroyed you with inflation, and this is something that you are suffering with, and I'm going to deal with it. The Harris camp, from what I saw, was keen to kind of demonstrate, some kind of a competent suite of policies, which do sound good in terms of like helping with home ownership deposits, in terms of child tax credits. These are all good policies, but they're kind of boilerplate democratic policies. There's no this kind of middle ground space of, why don't we just talk about how like inflation's come down? Wouldn't that be a good thing? I mean, that was effectively Sunak's strategy, right? In the UK, was kind of, we need to delay and wait for inflation to come down, because he had set a target of getting inflation from it was like double digits down to like 5%. And as soon as it got there, he's okay, now I'm going to call an election. Maybe this will help. At least there was some kind of rationale there. And I just don't see the logic behind a democratic strategy of just leaving that gap. It felt like they were maybe a bit too complacent on the economy, when realistically you're just leaving it open for Trump to fill.
Yeah, I think to be fair as well, though, pretty much every election now is successively the most social media election that has ever been, right? And I think you are starting to see it. I mean, we've been seeing this for years now. It used to be kind of insightful to talk about filter bubbles and echo chambers, but everyone knows about this now. But like, in a way, like, again, going back to how the fundamentals, modeling and theory kind of work, the idea is that the campaign can actually cut through, that people are sort of forced, if you like, to deal with economic reality in this case. And I think there's, for the kind of block, the Trump coalition, like, that just hasn't happened. I think that the kind of persuadable voters were probably that part of the Biden coalition that's drifted away, who weren't made to feel that this was economically in their interest. So that's kind of, I don't know. I think it is now possible to experience American politics through a lens that is fundamentally aligned with Donald Trump and not reality. I was saying to a colleague, like, you can't, but the problem is you can't just vote to make reality different. Like, we discovered that to some extent here in the United Kingdom after Brexit, right? Like, there is, there are limits to to reality that do at some point kind of impose themselves. It's why I think it was why COVID was so difficult for Trump, because it was a scientific, physical thing. But there's no doubt that there's a whole infrastructure around, essentially, I mean, and kind of tragically in a way, just around inflating Donald Trump's ego.
Yeah.
It seems like that's a whole way of living now, and that can include saying that economic growth was bad under Biden when it was good,
Yeah.
when it's objectively better. You know what I mean? So I think that sort of failure of the fundamentals, obviously is a failure of me personally in terms of like picking my modeling strategy for the campaign. But it does, I think, tell us something interesting about this election, that it can be understood as one. The markets understood, the fundamentals didn't. The polls kind of were a little bit
In
useless as
between,
well.
Yeah.
So if you're kind of interested in forecasting, you'd have to say like markets,
Yeah.
victory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Orange Jesus is the man to follow
listen
now.
to Orange Jesus on
Yeah, we should all listen to
horseracpolitics.co.uk.
Orange Jesus, who was I think posted Magalicious
Magalicious, which
on the social
to their
exchange.
credit is a decently good word. Like,
Magalicious.
at least there's some joy that can be taken out of this whole experience. I think what's very important to consider now is what we're about to experience.
Oh, well, just while we're announcing our complete failure to predict things, I also but it's slightly more optimistic. I'd also I think I will now like radically downgrade my electoral violence likelihood estimates now that Trump has kind of won.
Yeah.
I think while the Democrat side are going to be like really disappointed and downcast in many ways, I don't think the kind of risk of the kind of certification process, the risk of kind of,
Yeah.
I mean, at the start of the night we're hearing about bomb threats.
Yep.
But as Trump's victory started to crystallize, like that threat dissipated, which tells you a lot about the nature of that threat, the kind of one-sidedness of it.
Yeah.
But maybe I was actually wrong in more ways than are probably apparent. I was wrong in thinking that Harris had a strong chance of winning, but I was also wrong in thinking that electoral violence was very likely. Those two things were connected.
Yeah.
But it is a good thing that as we record, no one's been killed in post-election violence.
No, I haven't even seen any significant protesting.
I think the Democrats are just
Shell-shocked.
completely shell-shocked and downcast from what the coverage I've seen. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, you kind of hit this quite a few times. It's fundamentally, it's one of the most important things in political forecasting, to say that you were wrong, right? To just hold your hands up and say, and horse race politics, one of the main kind of mechanisms of this platform is to kind of provide that transparency, that accountability. So for anyone who's kind of unaware, every forecast is scored out of 110 points, right? You get up to 100 points based on how confident you were on specific outcomes happening or not happening, and how early you made those predictions. So the earlier you make them, the more points you get. And then there's a little 10-point boost for how early you started forecasting. And we have a leaderboard system, and we have the ability for you to hover over each of those scores and see what did each user get. And there's no hiding. And I think I think a lot of the discourse now is going to be post-mortem. It's going to be, let's do an autopsy on what went wrong. The Harris campaign was terrible and this, that, but there's much less accountability in modern discourse. The talking heads don't hold their hands up and say, I was wrong. They seek to try and find some explanation that maybe kind of justifies I think
it's the human,
perception.
that's also the human condition, right? It's like nobody deliberately likes to lose face or admit that they were wrong. But it does help us learn, actually, I do think. And I think what it helps us learn is actually harder to say at this point, right? I think, and this is always the issue. So, with horse race politics, it's why we kind of disaggregated the election into several kind of different markets. So rather than just being lucky on one, you had to actually understand the thing. So what I've learned, I mean, is simple in a way. I've completely misread this election. I've misread it in terms of the result. The result wasn't in the end even close.
No.
And I saw Harris winning, so that's literally opposite, and I've misread it in terms of violence. That hasn't crystallized. So I think for me, someone like me, yeah, that the kind of discipline of putting your forecast down is to evaluate yourself, and to see, I suppose, this is the first time we've had the site kind of like as it is now live for an election, to sort of see whether I'm just crap in general, or that this was just a hard election, because for example, if we end up going to the Irish election next, that's a project we're looking at. I think that's the fundamentals-based election all the way. I think that's an election where the incumbent is literally just showering the country with money, and the incumbent are going to do well as a consequence of that. But I think that's the point in a way of doing something like this isn't just to win, but it's to learn. I'm happy to say that I've completely. I had the option of going with the betting markets, and I went with the fundamentals, and that was literally the opposite choice that I should have made.
Yeah.
I still think it's the right way to look at elections, but
yeah, do you see, and you kind of have to wildly speculate, so I appreciate that this is kind of a bit of a stretch, but do you see the fundamental upsetting being rooted in Trump, or a characteristic of where American democracy may just be headed? That there are characteristics that can kind of supersede the value of, it's the economy stupid is kind of going out the window. Obviously, N equals 1 in this case. It's one election.
Yeah.
The fundamentals have been okay, but this could represent, without getting carried away, a dramatic shift in how you understand elections. To be able to say, okay, most importantly, how people feel the economy is doing, even if that has a mismatch with the reality of it, which the fundamentals would emphasize, what is the objective reality of the economy? And you say, well, across the board, it's doing okay. Maybe in some places it's not doing okay, some places doing better. But then people's perceptions of it, and maybe this is anecdotal, but every kind of man on the street, every vox pop you see, it's groceries cost too much, it's this. No one's really kind of doing any objective connection to maybe the COVID pandemic and kind of high government spending. These kind of objective truths of the state of play of the economy being disregarded in favor of just how are you feeling, And Trump's obviously tried to hit that towards the end of the campaign, kind of repurposing the "Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?" And it's all about perception, and I think that poses a massive threat to the fundamentals going forward, and it represents also a significant advantage for opposition parties in any context to be able to say, well, here is evidence that opting for basically vibes over the actual state of the election can allow you to win in a context where the economy doesn't actually suit you. It didn't suit Trump, from an objective numerical basis.
And again, I go back to, so I cited Lynn Vavreck, who's a very good writer on campaign strategy from political science perspective. As when you are the opposition and the economy is good, you do have to shift. Now she argues you have to shift the kind of issue salience agenda around. But what you're suggesting, and what I'm increasingly feeling is you just have to shift the extent of rationality in the discussion down, essentially tune that down to zero as much as possible. And I think obviously we've seen here in the United Kingdom characters like Boris Johnson. So I'm still waiting on these 40 hospitals, for example, where they're able to just get to claim whatever they like, and they just keep repeating it. They don't seem to be particularly perturbed if it's pointed out to them that it's not true. They just give you another lie. And I don't know, it's in some senses it was ever thus. Politics always has a sort of an irrational element. It's kind of irrational to cooperate in a lot of ways in anything. But I guess if you look at trajectories like, I don't know, with Orban's regime, or Poland went through similar times where these kind of actors they increasingly kind of dominate the media landscape, and they try and essentially set align perception with their desired reality, I do just feel that there is such a thing as reality. You know what I mean? Certainly it feels like that most days to me. And that ultimately it's kind of difficult to occlude reality and to kind of and to kind of harness that. But it's certainly, you know, you saw in a lot of the coverage, it was the idea that Harris had to be like perfect and Trump got a free pass. And there is a sense of that like you can't escape that. If Harris had said like 1% of the things that Trump had said, she would have never made it. Now, Trump seems to have something that nobody else in American politics has. And yet, like, and I think part of my job is going to be understanding why people like Trump and support him. And I'll say to the camera, America, like, you have made a bad decision. You've made a bad decision. You picked a bad man to be in charge. And like, if you look at Donald Trump and see a good person, I actually don't know what to say to you.
You've got many bridges to sell that person.
Well, like, I just don't know what, as a human being, you think you're aspiring to. To somebody who's, you know, as far as I can tell, a complete scumbag in every dimension of life. Like, so, you know, I don't know. I do have, and this is very much like the liberal tears, right? It's like I actually can't understand it.
Yeah.
Emotionally or logically. There doesn't seem to be much of a logic. I mean, do the white non-college educated men, are they really looking forward to like a bonanza under Trump in terms of their lives?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. Certainly he doesn't have policies that are designed to help them. So it makes it difficult to understand the kind of logic. And then emotionally, I'm like, why are you looking up to this guy?
Yeah. I
don't see that he has anything. I think he's one of the worst examples of humanity that is paraded in front of us. And now I have to listen to this guy for another 4 years.
Yeah.
And he's part of literally dominating the global discourse.
Yeah.
So America, like, thank you. Thank you for and you know, you might have noticed that that the results now aren't, the process is no longer tainted. It turns out it was fair all along.
Yeah. There's nothing rigged with mail-in ballots.
Anyway, I do find that hard to kind of countenance, that someone can literally reject a process when they lose and accept it when they win.
Yep.
And we're all meant to act like that's normal.
That's a normal thing, yeah.
You know, I can't accept that's normal. I don't think Elon Musk is the smartest man in the world. No. I think Elon Musk is a really dangerous character. And again, thanks America, you know, so we'll see how Elon Musk's vision for a
stripped down government,
AI assisted humanity future works out. Yes, it is quite. I think that the election was fair. I think they counted the votes. I think Trump won.
Yep.
But I don't think it's a good thing.
No, and one of the, I think, most important considerations is that in 2016 he comes in as this wild card. He's loud, he's brash, he says disgusting things, but he's different. He represents a shake-up to the system. And when everything that you've seen politically is...
Especially against Clinton, he lined up so well.
Exactly. The most establishment candidate you could possibly ask for. But then you had 4 years of him. Then you had 4 years of election denial. Then you had January 6th. Then you had rampant misinformation, disinformation. Then you had Nazi rhetoric. Like, I'm not calling Trump Hitler. I've seen people get their panties in a bunch when somebody says that. But he was using Nazi rhetoric. Like,
fascist rhetoric.
Fascist rhetoric.
The Nazis were just one, you know, tributary to that river, yeah.
For sure. I want to, like, try and kind of rationalize it as best I can. But you now have effectively 8 years of evidence as to what kind of person this man is, what kind of threat that he poses, the way he views these others, the way that he will wield power. And now we've got an institutional framework that effectively makes him God.
The checks and balances
are
all in the same direction.
Fucking dead in the US. We have a Supreme Court with a conservative supermajority who've ruled in favor of him with the immunity protection. Without a doubt, he's going to get another appointment on there. These are people who are there for a very long time. He has the Senate. If there's any chance that the House flips, he will be unconstrained. Unconstrained. And
yet can I still think he's a moron?
Yeah.
But like he's literally cracked America. He owns America
He
now.
owns it somehow.
Yeah, because people voted for him.
And the rhetoric of people kind of in his immediate network, there's a tweet from everyone's favorite, Marjorie Taylor Greene. She said, Donald Trump will be the 47th president of the United States. And then she said something which is quite alarming and I think needs to be highlighted. She says, I can't wait to dismantle the weaponized government. What the hell do you mean by that? You are the government. Okay, you have been there. And now we're kind of seeing these institutional guardrails are no longer there. All of these generals who come out and said he's a fascist and said he's he's kind of looked up to Hitler in some regards. These are people who are no longer there to stop him.
They were the adults in the room.
They were the people who were there to say you can't do this.
Well, yeah, well, I think RFK seems to be pretty on top of health policy, right? So I thought vaccines actually did work, but it turns out I was wrong.
No.
And now
I
the
remember
smartest,
not dying in the pandemic.
Because
that was
Musk
pretty
is the
good.
smartest guy in the world. Trump's the best businessman.
Yeah.
So RFK must have the best medical information. So I'm sorry to my children for giving them vaccines.
I mean, I want to.
Sorry, guys.
I want to read this very quickly. A segment from the Guardian because I'm a snowflake liberal. What was
This feels like a therapy session rather than a podcast. I do feel like
it's okay.
Yeah, it is. It is.
What was the
It is okay.
Was it Suella Braverman who yeah, it was Suella Braverman who said tofu eating wokurati Guardian reading. Yeah. So that's who we are, right? I'm happy. Although tofu sucks ass.
Yeah,
but I want to read
wouldn't
this.
eat a lot of tofu.
This section from David Smith. It's just like 2 paragraphs. I think it kind of nicely sums up the whole thing. Where he says, sometimes fear triumphs over hope. Donald Trump's shocking victory in the 2016 US presidential election was described as a leap into the unknown. This time there is no excuse. America knew that he was a convicted criminal, serial liar, and racist demagogue who 4 years ago attempted to overthrow the government and voted for him anyway. The result is a catastrophe for the world, and it saw Kamala Harris's competence and expertise, decency and grace, her potential to be the first female president in America's history, evaporate, right? It also saw Trump's venality and vulgarity, his crass insults and crude populism, his dehumanization of immigrants that echoed Adolf Hitler, and the world asked, how is this race even close? But elections hold up a mirror to a nation, and the nation does not always like what it sees. And fundamentally, all of these things that we talked about this in the last episode about, there are all of these things that he can just say, that he can just do.
Get away with.
And he gets away with them. And that, whether you like it or not, is a reflection of the country as a whole. Now, I'm not saying all of these things apply to America, but there is something to be said for, like, you are the check and balance as the vote.
Ultimately, yeah.
You are the one who says, you can't say this. And for some reason, all of that just gets a free pass. And, like, if you said in a lecture,
Some of these things, yeah.
you know what? I don't like people who have come to this university from a different country. You're poisoning Swansea University's blood. You have no job. You're done. You're blacklisted.
Might be a disciplinary hearing, yeah.
Maybe 1, or maybe 2. You know, Swansea's pretty hardcore about punishing.
But not just for work. But it would be wrong to say that.
Yeah.
It would be wrong as a human being. It's wrong to be racist.
Yeah.
It's wrong. It's not like a negotiable sort of a. It's not like being left wing or right wing. Mm-hmm. It's not like find people on both sides, as Donald Trump would say. It's wrong to be racist.
So I think let's end on a message of hope. I'm going to go stand in front of moving traffic.
Let's end on a message of hope.
What do you see as, I mean, Jesus Christ, what do you see as kind of being the main dynamic that America is about to experience? Because obviously he's not in until January. We haven't, at the moment of recording, we haven't even heard from Harris. There has been
no. She has announced though that she will make what will probably be a concession speech in the university where she's kind of based. Yeah,
what happens?
So I think I think what happens formally is the transition process begins.
Yeah,
and I think a first really interesting thing to see will be will the kind of acolytes of the campaign actually get cabinet positions. Mm-hmm. So is Elon Musk actually going to be running the Department for Government Efficiency? You know, so this is a guy who when he took over Twitter, like pretty much immediately fired like half of the staff.
Yep.
So, you know,
And Trump has said that Musk has identified something like $2 trillion worth of wasteful spending,
Yeah.
but refused to elaborate on what that was and suggested he would defund the Department of Education. So
Yeah.
good luck with schools, America. Good luck with schools.
As I mentioned, RFK as the health brief. So there's a lot of the kind of appointment and delivery of political patronage. I think Tesla shares have had a pretty nice 10-15% bounce today. There's just the machinery, I suppose, of a new regime being put into place, building up towards inauguration. In the now famous date of January 6th. What it means, I mean, you know, I think we're going to hopefully have a colleague, Luca Trenta, who's asked to talk to us a bit about
foreign policy
implications. But
that should be next week for anyone interested.
I think anyone who I've met who knows about these things thinks this is disaster for Ukraine, an absolute disaster for Ukraine.
Yep. And business as normal in Palestine.
And business, yeah, and if anything, an amplification of that conflict. But
I think he said to Netanyahu, "Just do what you have to do." But Ukraine is.
This is the kind of. So it's fundamentally destabilized the kind of NATO alliance. I think and I think it's fundamentally weakened, especially Ukraine. You know, the Ukraine's position has taken a massive blow here, and they'll be celebrating in the Kremlin.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
that's not is that a message of hope? I suppose if you're Vladimir Putin, it is. But I
these
don't
are objective
see much,
truths.
I don't see much to be hopeful in it. I think just, you know, you were talking and we were trying to make sense of it earlier as well. And I think I think with Boris Johnson, I felt it more closely because I was living here at the time. But I think it's true to say that both of those candidates they're kind of agents of disinhibition, right? They're like alcohol in a way. They're so crazy that they kind of give everyone else permission to be themselves, as it were. And in a way, I think it's that, like you used to talk about holding up a mirror to a country. It's like it's that kind of id of the nation that's kind of on display.
Yeah.
And it is it's an ugly picture when you systematically target and dehumanize minority groups in your society. It's not a good thing. It should be resisted, and maybe that's the message of hope that politics aren't just for an election; they're forever, and you get to fight politically things that you would disagree with.
Jeez.
But you do have to live with the election results for 4 years in this case.
Quite a fair bit of time. And we've seen from the policy platform of Trump and his associates that this could be a very radical 4 years. But I think
including the suppression of political dissent. I mean, that's on the agenda in a way.
2 days ago, he made a joke about people shooting at the press, and he was okay with it.
It's on the agenda in a way it's never been on the agenda in American politics. Even if you go back to the McCarthy era, I think the kind of suppression of what would normally be seen as legitimate pluralistic politics, that's a dynamic to watch out for. But that is something that can be resisted.
Yeah. Well, I mean, especially it's much more volatile, given that if you want to go down that kind of McCarthyism, Red Scare, at least you're kind of rooting this in some kind of, like, as you say, kind of wider geopolitical context of securitization. Whereas now it's just ego. Now it's just, I'm going to do this because I don't like you. And where does the buck stop? Like, who, well, you know, it's the first they came for X, first they came for Y, first they came for Z.
I'd say Labour in the UK have done nearly the maximum possible damage they could have done to themselves by sending campaign workers over
That's
systematically.
Going to be a very awkward meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're natural bedfellows in any case.
No.
I mean, some of David Lammy's quotes are being revisited today, but
special relationship is.
But I think understanding Trump through the dynamics of literally his self-interest in the narrowest possible sense is as good a way as any to navigate these next 4 years. To just understand whatever appeals to Trump is what Trump's going to do.
Yeah. Well, fundamentally, we at Horse Race Politics, we take accountability. Okay. We know that we got this one really fucking wrong.
Realized.
Yeah, here we are, putting our faces on our predictions. The leaderboards will update in due course, but
yeah, well done, Orange Jesus. I mean,
we don't know if this individual has actually won. we certainly haven't.
No, I think we do know that we haven't won the forecasting competition, and maybe just to say, well, a message of hope. I really enjoyed, actually. We spent the evening watching the results in kind of real time with our students, and
That was good.
it was actually quite inspired. Like the way that younger people now are using the internet to process information is actually amazing.
Yeah, we had guys with laptops open, interactive maps,
like
just breaking down the whole thing, like
20 windows at the same time.
CNN election desk. You know, it was impressive. I think there is a beautiful political engagement level in younger generations that we're starting to see, and also just a general,
but understanding. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
But the Horse Race Politics podcast is not ending with this. It depends on how successful I am going through moving traffic, but it fundamentally, we still have a long way to go. We still have some more results to come in, although that will not dramatically change the race. But we've got the outcome of the House of Representatives. We're going to have kind of the transfer of power, but also we're going to start kind of gearing our discussions towards what the next 4 years are going to look like. So next week, we're hopefully going to have a conversation with Dr. Luca Trenta about what Trump's foreign policy is going to look like, stabilization of NATO, the geopolitics of Ukraine, of Israel-Palestine. What are we going to expect on the international stage from Donald Trump?
Economic tariff barrier with China.
Tariffs with China.
It's all ahead of us now.
So that is where we're going to be pivoting towards. Horse Race Politics podcast, the Horse Race Politics website, is still going to be going. We still have a lot of races to close out. It's crazy, right? It's crazy to be in this position, but we are enjoying this podcast, even if it's a bit of humble pie at the moment.
Yeah, and I hope
this is good.
I hope listeners gain something from it, and I think at least I suppose that by having a system where you can sort of set out what you think and then review it.
Yeah.
There is a capacity to kind of operate on a common platform, even with people who have very different political beliefs. And this was a win in a way, in every sense, for the Trump team. You have to acknowledge it.
Yeah, they did win. We're not election deniers here, as much as we might want to be, because it means we get a better score on Horse Race Politics. But unless you have anything else to add, I think we've got to close it out there.
No. Everyone have a lovely new American dawn, and get ready for literally 4 years.
4 years of
4 more years.
4 more years. Thank you again to Focus Games and the Wales Institute of Social and Economic Research and Data for helping get Horse Race Politics to where it is, and for helping us create the Horse Race Politics podcast. And thank you to Swansea University and the wonderful media team here for everything they do. Big up, Dave.
Thank you, Dave.
Who's over there. Big up, Dave.
And just maybe someone check in on Alan Lickman.
Someone check in on Alan Lickman.
That'd be good.
Like that guy's not doing okay. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.